Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here for our panel on the body within ethnographic fieldwork and mediated contexts. I'm Aya Yadlin Segal, and in this presentation, I'm going to discuss a topic that relates to my personal experience as a researcher with a physical mobility limitation and focus on the movement between online and offline spaces within media research. With participant observation being the heart of the ethnographic process, the standards of immersion in the field, with participant observation being the heart of the ethnographic process, the standards of immersion in a field of study have emphasized the everyday lives of participants over the particularities and experiences of the ethnographer herself. Within this perspective, an ethnographer's task Within this perspective, ethnography allows researchers to embody the fieldwork experience, living and feeling the daily routines that order the everyday lives of those in the field. This is done to understand patterns of values and attitudes within the lives of participants. The ways in which these routines interconnect with and are complicated by the relationship between physical and socio-political environments remains topic less discussed in scholarly literature. The problematic issue is that these standards of participation might reproduce environmental barriers that traditionally exclude disabled people from key areas of social life. Here, a quick review of what online environments mean. I argue that this problem can and should be acknowledged, and we can solve many of the outcomes of these excluding standards by looking at online environments as a way to participate in media research without excluding those who cannot take part in material offline participant observation. So here, a quick review of what online environments means for individuals of different marginalized groups is needed. On the one hand, it is found that online spaces become arenas of exclusion for minorities, further pushing them to the margins of society. This is evident in multiple contexts, but specifically in the context of religion, ethnicity, and race, through cyberbullying and cyber hate that expand experiences of hatred from offline interactions to online ones, linking the two spaces into an accumulative sense of exclusion. Most relevant to my discussion is a similar experience that occurs in the lives of many individuals with reduced physical abilities. On a technological level, connective platforms that do not meet accessibility standards often limit the abilities to be included in social and cultural life online due to barriers that traditionally exclude disabled people. On a social-cultural level, it is found that even online, disabled individuals experience their own bodies and abilities through negative. On a social-cultural level, it is found that even online, disabled individuals experience their own bodies and abilities through negative stereotypes and prejudice. Internet-based environments allow individuals to display a concealed and selective self-presentation, one that puts forward a socially idealized self rather than a self that is grounded in offline characteristics and cues. This way, we find that individuals with reduced physical abilities internalize social standards of beauty and health and experience their own bodies as abnormal or subsocial. But on the other hand, we also see online environments as alternative spaces of acceptance for marginalized groups. This is seen in the context of religion, where religious minorities find online enclaves that allow them to negotiate acceptance of their own identity and community. And similarly, cancer patients find online platforms as means for creating a sense of community and understanding, which is also true in other health conditions with stigmatized aspects. The wonderful Avi Marciano shows us that this is also true in the context of gender identification and social orientation, where minorities find online venues as spaces of acceptance in processes of coming out of the closet and negotiation of identity markers. And finally, and most relevant to the case of this presentation, in the case of physical disabilities, online environment and connective media enable disabled people to And finally, and most relevant to the case of this presentation, in case of And finally, and most relevant to this presentation, is the case of physical disabilities, where online environments and connective media enable disabled people to express themselves freely. Connective media allow disabled people to express themselves free of others' judgment about disability, have access to information about disability, and gain liberation and empowerment in exploring social connections. These are all true in the case of participants in our studies and studied communities. But what about our own identity, physicality, and presence? These are all true in the case of participants in our studies, in our studied communities. But what about our own identity, our own physicality, and our own presence in the field? What about the cases where physical participation is not optional for a researcher? And you're probably thinking, but how can we make sense of excluding standards in ethnographic research? And what is the place of online spaces in those cases? And you're probably asking yourselves, thinking, but what is the problem? Virtual ethnography is alive and kicking, happening and published routinely. We have so many kinds of approaches. To the very same understanding of immersion and participation online. From early cyborg anthropology, discussed way back in 1995, up to digital anthropology, we see many different articulations of processes of ethnographic research in online and connective environments. Network ethnography, digital ethnography, connective ethnography, and ethnography are just a few that look at immersion and participant observation as the heart of ethnography that is conducted in online spaces. But at the same time, during my own work, presenting in conferences, submitting to publication venues, and But at the same time, during my own work in online environments and during my own ethnographic work in online environments, presenting in conferences, submitting to publication venues, participating in workshops, and even discussing the issue with colleagues, ethnographers deeply rooted in offline experiences react, saying that ethnography online ethnography is not real ethnography when you're studying a computer, completely lacking the understanding that while it is conducted through computers and computed media outlets, we're not actually studying the computer itself. Others argue that these are not real interactions because they're not conducted in the flesh, face to face. Others ask, how can you know they're not lying, arguing that offline experiences are more authentic than online experiences because of the different cues and the different interactions we might experience as researchers. And finally, others ask, how can you know they, the participant that is, didn't regret what they have shared online? So the understanding is that online environments are not as real or not as authentic as offline ones, and thus online ethnography is not as real or as authentic as offline one. I argue that the push towards an offline interaction as means of authentication and validation of both the researcher and the researched is an excluding one. Prioritizing the material body over an embedded online presence as means of engagement is an ableist stance within ethnographic research. The focus on the material participation is seen here as the prioritizing of the non-disabled in the material field. And the fieldwork then becomes a site of conflict for researchers with differently abled bodies. And fieldwork then becomes a site of conflict for researchers with different fieldwork then becomes a site of conflict for researchers with differently abled bodies rather than a site of knowledge production. So in this discussion, I want to emphasize the need for developing a model for developing terminology that highlights cases in which online ethnographic work opens new opportunities for physically disabled ethnographers, a means for inclusion of others. And here I understand that not all interactions can or should be studied using online ethnography, but since our life expand into online environments more and more and more than ever before, it is crucial to understand that many of the interactions we are experiencing today in the workplace, at home, with our immediate communities or virtual communities should be studied and can be studied using online ethnography. By working on ethnographic accounts held online, disabled researchers are able to journey along their participants in ways that are limited in offline context by material restrictions. So if there is one thing I wish to get out of this discussion of disability, it's asking us all, as a community that studies alternatives to mainstream media and communication is to think about the epistemological implications of the body in the non-material experience of the field. We need to remember that bodies react to limitations, and our ability to produce knowledge is limited by these standards. And with this in mind, I wish to thank you for your time, and I really hope that we can develop a discussion about the topic in what follows in the other presentations and in our Q&A session.